Hey friends, Eddie here from filmbuZZer. The fifth and final season of Stranger Things was released on Netflix in 3 stages. The first 4 episodes on November 26th, 2025, episodes 5 through 7 on December 25th, 2025, and the 8th and final episode on December 31st, 2025. This review contains full spoilers for the entire season, including the ending. If you're not caught up yet, you might want to stop here. And you can tell from the very first minute that this season does not want to tell just another adventure in Hawkins. It wants to end things. Not neatly, not comfortably, but with a story that tightens like a knot. The opening is brutal because it doesn't just reference trauma, it makes it physical. We see Will in the Upside Down back then, singing, running, falling, getting captured, and finally being marked by Vecna. This is not a nostalgic flashback, it's a statement. This season is about the fact that the past never went away and that Will was never simply rescued. Then we jump to 1987. Hawkins is a quarantine zone. The military is everywhere. People are undergoing health checks because of spores. The rifts are sealed with metal plates like a grotesque temporary fix, and in the middle of this constant tension, the characters have been crawling through danger zones for what feels like forever, trying to locate Vecna. It's smart because it feels like a war of attrition. Everyone is exhausted, but stopping isn't an option. And then the first real blow hits the Wheelers. Holly doesn't just go missing, she is hunted, dragged out of her bedroom. Karen fights like hell, Ted is violently thrown aside, there is blood everywhere, and Eleven immediately runs into the Upside Down after her without hesitation. This moment matters because it sets the season's biggest promise. This final chapter is personal. Not Hawkins in the abstract, but family. Not monsters attack, but a child is taken. At the same time, the season builds something deeply unsettling that is almost worse than the creatures themselves. Vecna doesn't appear as a horror monster, but as a calm, reasonable presence in the form of an imaginary friend. Mr. What's-It, pocket watch, vest, gentle voice. And the key detail is that the name Henry comes up. That makes it clear this isn't random imagination, it's deliberate manipulation. Vecna uses child logic against children. He invents safety in order to control. This is where Stranger Things is at its strongest in season 5, because it's no longer just monster spectacle but a question. How do you convince someone who is afraid to follow you willingly? The middle episodes make this painfully tangible. In the Turnbow trap, Derek Turnbow becomes the next target and Will turns into the central figure. He's no longer just the kid who gets goosebumps. He's a receiver. He gets images, voices, perspectives. And for the first time, the group uses that offensively. They lure the Demogorgon, tag it, hunt it, improvise with acetone water bombs, traps in the house, and a vicious pit. This is classic Stranger Things craft, but with a much harsher edge. You can feel it's no longer kids versus monsters, but we lose people if we mess this up. Then Sorcerer pulls the rug out from under everything. Max isn't simply in a coma. Her consciousness exists inside Vecna's memory prison. She's awake, she's hiding, she has learned how this mindscape works, and she becomes Holly's lifeline. Emotionally, this lands hard because Max is no longer treated as a passive tragedy, but as a survivor who refuses to disappear out of sheer defiance. At the same time, the real world escalates. The military starts collecting children. Dr. K constructs a rationale that feels like Brenner in a new uniform, and the show makes its point very clearly. The greatest danger isn't just the Upside Down, it's what people choose to do with it. Episodes 5 and 6 turn 2 screws at once. First, Vecna's plan becomes explicit. He gathers a group of children, calls them vessels, talks about dormant potential, and sells the light as a monster-free salvation. It's cult language disguised as rescue. Second, the mythology hardens. The story shifts from parallel world to unstable bridge. The exotic matter in the lab isn't a flashy sci-fi device, it's a ticking catastrophe. And suddenly it's clear, one wrong move doesn't just stop Vecna, it tears everything apart. That's exactly why what the season does with Will works so well. He doesn't just become more powerful, he becomes dangerous, even to himself. His telekinetic attack on the Demogorgons is shocking because it looks exactly like Vecna's signature. For a moment you see how close he comes to something dark. And then the key idea lands. Will doesn't win by becoming stronger, he wins by refusing to let fear steer him anymore. This becomes explicit shortly before the finale, when he finally says out loud what he's carried his entire life. Not as a twist, but as release. And that's where the season states its theme most clearly. Vecna feeds on what people hide. Once they speak their truth, he loses leverage. Episode 7, The Bridge, is emotionally loaded and deliberately divisive for that reason. It's not the episode of answers, it's the episode of convergence. Max returns to her body. Karen becomes part of this world because she literally survives it. The group is finally whole again. At the same time, the episode shows how cruel Vecna's system really is. Holly tears herself out of a cocoon, vomits mind flare particles, runs through Dimension X, and gets dragged back. There is no comforting, we'll just pull her out. It's a web of spores, spires, the pain tree, and a villain who can switch at any moment from Mr. What's-It to Vecna. What the bridge also does is define the endgame rules without drowning in technobabble. The abyss is the origin. The upside down is the unstable connection. Vecna wants to use the children as vessels to fuse that connection permanently. That's why the group's plan makes sense. They get close enough, 11 enters the void via the lab and the tanks, Carly backs her up, Max navigates, and a bomb collapses the bridge behind them so it can't reopen. This isn't press the right button, it's a plan where every piece can fail. And then the episode ends on an image that hurts because it feels real. The children in the false sanctuary turn into a small cult. Back to the light becomes a mantra. Holly isn't believed. She's physically attacked. Even her Holly the Heroic amulet is used against her. It's deeply uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it works. Vecna doesn't need monsters to create violence. He just needs a story that feels comforting enough. In the finale, the right side up, everything narrows to one night, the moment when Vecna intends to finish what he started. The show is very clear here. This is the final confrontation, and everyone has to risk everything. What matters for an ending explained perspective is this. After everything the season has set up, the ending cannot feel like a clean reset. The upside down isn't just a place, it's a scar. A connection created by human interference and made worse by more interference. To understand the ending, you shouldn't ask who wins the fight, but who chooses what. 11 is no longer a lone superweapon. She's part of a network of relationships. Hopper, torn between protection and control. Mike, who believes in an ending even when logic says there shouldn't be one. Joyce, who has to accept that she can't save Will by keeping him small. Max, who proves that survival is possible even inside hell. And Will, who isn't strong because he can tear monsters apart, but because he stops treating himself as a flaw. The ending of Stranger Things doesn't work like a classic series finale because it doesn't promise a final victory. Vecna is stopped, but not erased. The bridge is cut, but the wound remains. The show is very deliberate about this. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the cause is gone. You learn how to live with it. That's why Stranger Things doesn't end with triumph, but with continuation. This season doesn't explain its ending through lore dumps, but through consequences. Vecna isn't just a monster, he's a mechanism that exploits fear. The finale isn't simply boss defeated, it's the dismantling of that mechanism. Truth instead of suppression, connection instead of isolation, risk instead of false safety. And even if the larger victory is achieved, what remains is what has always defined Stranger Things. It's not about Hawkins being clean and healed again, it's about these people still standing afterward, changed, older, and finally honest with each other. In the end, Season 5 is not a flawless finale, but it is almost always a brave one. It's dark, often brutal, and sometimes unexpectedly tender. It plays its strongest hand when it uses the supernatural as a mirror, not a toy. And it makes a decision I respect deeply. It doesn't treat trauma like a switch you flip, but like something you survive by refusing to hide anymore. That's not a small statement for a show that once began with bikes, walkie-talkies, and a missing boy. It's an ending that feels earned. Taken as a whole, Stranger Things will be remembered less for its monsters or mythology, and more for the way it made genre storytelling feel personal again. It reminded a generation that big ideas work best when they're grounded in character, emotion, and human fear. Long after the plot details fade, what remains are these people, their bonds, and the feeling of having grown up alongside them. Stranger Things doesn't just end a story, it closes a chapter of shared pop culture memory, and that, more than any final twist or reveal, is why it lasts. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Share the video with your friends and feel free to drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.